Uncle Doug.
Hi.
Hi. Listen, I've been looking for a new drag name for an act that I'm putting together, and and I don't feel comfortable with the with sort of puns. So I'm just looking for
You're Anita Cocktail, your head of lettuce, that sort of thing.
Did the
exactly.
Thomas Jefferson estate finally come after you?
Yeah. You don't want to piss off Big Jefferson. So I don't know. Maybe Uncle Mark? Maybe you can help me out.
Well,
with that.
I do. Let me see if I can get you into. How about the Night Hag?
Ooh,
yeah.
No, I'm already using that one. I've already got that.
Hey, well, let me explain a little bit about who this is.
Is the Night Hag the fighter of the Day Hag?
Did a little Sunny in Philadelphia deep cut for everybody. Today I want to talk about how a very real psychological thing that occurs very commonly across the world that can and has helped supernatural beliefs stick around well past their expiration dates. And I want to begin this journey with an excerpted reading from a short story by a legendary author, me. This is one of many tales from my almost impossibly idyllic youth here on the verdant southern shore of the Great Salt Lake. And now, if you will indulge me, fellas. And so we just jump into the action already in progress.
Oh, yes.
One such authority figure, Aunt Ethel, would occasionally brave the demon-haunted wastelands and travel southward to darken our door. A Canadian relative on my mother's side, Ethel saw herself as a spiritual warrior par excellence, or at least someone Satan himself saw fit to torment on a near daily basis. She would gather us vulnerable, tender souls in the cluttered basement family room to regale us with stories of her combat. Once, she told us, she was driving the family Winnebago loaded with her sleeping children through the Canadian Midwest. She said she went into a trance when Satan flew in front of her windshield in the form of an owl, and she froze, driving in a straight line for hundreds of miles. She watched every exit disappear behind her, and only the intercession of Jesus and her physical might, with which, she explained, she was able to lift the Winnebago off the roadway by the steering wheel and fly it off an exit to safety, and saved her life and that of her blissfully unconscious family. Do you remember Aunt Ethel, Doug?
Vaguely. I think
she was loony. Another time, she told us with all the passion of someone truly reliving the moment about Lucifer's nocturnal visit to her bedroom. She had been minding her own business, enjoying her chaste and colorless Mormon dreams, when the wily Satan jumped from the high turnbuckle and executed a flawless knee drop right on her chest. She tried to scream, but no air would come to her under his crushing hooven weight. She said she could feel her ribs breaking, her lungs bursting into bloody pulps. "Oh, Ethel, how did you survive?" I practically screamed. Somehow, even in the very moment of her death, by what any medical examiner would surely label a classic devil side, brave Ethel summoned enough air to blurt, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." Then a little bit louder, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." It was working. Oh, dear heavens, it was working. At this point in the retelling, Ethel was bouncing up and down on our tattered couch, pounding its cat-scratched arm like an ER surgeon trying to restart a Satan-arrested heart. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." Ethel was saved. She would live to menace the darkened roadways of Saskatchewan in her flying Winnebago once again. So, my Canadian supernatural sleep warrior, Aunt Ethel, to her mind, had her sleep interrupted on the regular by Satan himself. But if she had been from Newfoundland rather than Saskatchewan, she may have described her nocturnal intruder as the Night Hag. If she lived in the Islamic world, specifically Egypt, she would call it a jinn. That's jinn with a J, not the jinn with a G that visits Uncle Doug every night.
Right.
Or if she was Cambodian, she would call it the ghost pushes you down. If she was Italian, she might call it the pandafecce, the emuntadore, or the manachiciccio, or the kanishibari if she was Japanese, or maybe if she was a different kind of Christian in an earlier time, she would call this frightening being a succubus. You see, people all around this flat earth experience what my poor haunted auntie did all the time. A terrifying inability to move, the feeling of being crushed under the weight of a malevolent evil, and a form taking shape out of the darkness. Now, are we as a global community so haunted by legions of demons intent on squishing us in the night?
Obviously, yes.
Probably. Or rather...
Very easy answer.
Yeah, so that's the end of the segment. We're all done.
Right.
Dan has his drag name.
Moving on.
Or rather, are we a big, broad human family with a shit ton of fleshy hardware and software that occasionally gets a little fritzy? The human brain is so fucking complex with so much that can go wrong. It's amazing so much actually goes right as often as it does.
That's true.
Perhaps rather than a pantheon of culturally congruent boogiesmen, maybe there's just a certain percentage of us that experience the fairly common physiological condition known simply as sleep paralysis. People who report these nocturnal attacks universally experience them at one of two very specific moments during their sleep cycle, either just as they're falling asleep or, more commonly, in the first moments of waking up. Now, I've had a few instances of sleep paralysis. One was 20 years ago-ish, and it scared the living shit out of me. And a couple very recently, after I knew what it was, and they were also weird, but since I knew what was happening, I tried to have a little fun with them. So, have you guys ever had it? Sleep paralysis?
I've never had it.
I don't think so.
I've heard of it, but
Yeah.
no, I've never had it.
So, what does science think is happening in these moments? Well, one of the cycles we normally go through when we sleep is REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And that's when we're dreaming. Now, evolution has given us a little gift to keep us from hurting ourselves or others during our dream state. We essentially become paralyzed. This prevents us from responding physically to whatever yard sale of images and sounds we're experiencing in our dreams, right? It's actually quite clever. It's lucky we have it. And while this keeps us safe under normal circumstances, if there's a little misfire in the old thinky meat, wakefulness and REM paralysis can overlap. So your brain becomes partially or fully conscious before your body does. So for people unused to the sensation of paralysis, this results in the feeling of being held down. Panic instantly ensues, but conscious control over breathing is also shut off at that point. It's all automatic. So the wanting to draw a huge breath in a moment of panic is not responded to, so one can feel like they're either being crushed or strangled. The panic is a mental state called threat hypervigilance, where the amygdala, an ancient part of the brain that is basically the fear center, goes into hyperdrive. Way back in episode 20, Dan talked about the phenomenon called Pareidolia. And that's the thing that happens when you're, for instance, walking alone at night and your brain begins to make you conjure faces out of the darkness, right? You start seeing these patterns. It can be frightening, but it's an evolutionary development that likely gave us some small advantage in trying to detect a threat hiding in the tall grass. Well, during threat hypervigilance, in our greatest moment of fight or flight, the pareidolia phenomenon cranks up to 11. So people laying there in an existential panic, suddenly unable to move, very quickly construct faces, voices, or whole figures out of the darkness. In my last two experiences, there was a deep animal-like growling behind me as I tried to push it away by rolling onto my back.
Interesting.
Now, I don't want to downplay how traumatic these experiences can be for people. They are fucking terrifying, and they can last anywhere from just a few seconds, with some going as long as 6 minutes for people.
Oh, my God.
That would be
Of
terrifying.
total paralysis, right?
Yeah, if you don't know what the hell's going on, that would be just
eternity.
Shock.
So my first one that I mentioned was about 20 years ago in a hotel in Moab. I think I've told you about this, Doug.
Yeah, I think so.
It was the middle of the night, and I woke to an incredibly intense buzzing sound. I was unable to move and felt unable to breathe. There was a tiny bit of light from the parking lot coming through the yellow curtains, and the buzzing felt like it was coming from the darkest corner of the room. So my eyes darted in that direction, and in the darkness, I saw kind of materialize a very thin form with a long neck bent to one side, with a small head peering over at me. Its skin looked like a liquid, dark, metallic material. I tried to jump up, but I couldn't. The buzzing became more intolerable until finally I could move, and in my panicked reach for the lamp, I knocked it off the nightstand. So I had to jump out of bed and fumble with it until I got it on. There was nothing there, right?
Right.
So needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. It was like 3 a.m, and I just turned on the TV and stayed up the rest of the night. I even asked the front desk the next morning if anyone had any, complaints about the room. She looked at me funny and said, no complaints. Well, what I know now that I didn't know then is that my REM paralysis got some of its peanut butter on the chocolate of my brain being suddenly awake, and my panicked brain painted a malevolent culprit into the darkness, giving me the fright of my life. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Despite my loony aunt's successful attempts to scare the shit out of baby Mark with her nightly combats with the devil, your Uncle Mark is not a religious man. So my brain didn't paint Satan or any Baphomet-looking demon into the corner. If anything, my projected intruder was more of an alien. So
interesting.
Maybe I just recently watched Fire in the Sky or Communion or something like that. But it's largely true that sleep paralysis hallucinations show you what you have been conditioned to fear the most.
Right.
In the United States, a significant number of people who believe there is a malevolent force behind their sleep paralysis episodes attribute them to extraterrestrials. And in fact, this may explain people earnestly feeling they experienced alien abductions. Culture and religious training train the imagination. Now, there was never a single reported case of alien abduction in the United States before the sci-fi TV series The Outer Limits aired an episode about a fictional alien abduction in 1961.
Really? Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, never a single report. And shortly after that, a couple, one or both of whom may have experienced sleep paralysis, reported being abducted, and their description of their captors closely matched the rubber alien heads on the TV show.
Huh.
It's kind of crazy.
That makes a lot of sense.
A TV show about their alleged experiences was made and aired in 1975, and reports of alien abductions went up in the U.S. 2,500%.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So people who see aliens as a result of their sleep paralysis come to believe they are being redeposited in their homes after a night of probing. A lot of people talk about seeing a figure. This is fascinating. A lot of people talk about seeing a figure that they call the Hat Man during sleep paralysis. Worldwide, his description is stunningly similar. Tall, lean, with a fedora accompanied by a terrifying aura of evil. But he was never reported before 1984. So what happened in 1984? Wes Craven released his horror phenomenon, A Nightmare on Elm Street, in which an often silhouetted Freddy Krueger is a dead match for descriptions of the Hat Man. And remember, in the movies, Freddy comes for you in your sleep.
Right.
So terrifying images people experience as children or teenagers can linger long afterwards. Which leads to another interesting fact I found in the research. In an international study, researchers found that in largely atheist Denmark, only 17% of those who experienced sleep paralysis fears thought that whatever was behind it could or would kill them. But in the more religious Egypt, over 50% of people did. In Egypt, the phenomenon is attributed to jinn, which are basically Islamic demons who are bent on killing people.
It's where the term genie comes from.
That's right.
A jinn.
Yeah. And they're actually pre-Islamic. They existed before Islam, but they got adopted. And it seems that fearing sleep paralysis might trigger further instances.
Oh, no.
So fear may become a contributing factor in creating a feedback loop of more and more terrifying experiences, as they think it's doing to people in Egypt. And this can be totally devastating to people. People have ruined their functional lives trying not to fall asleep for days at a time.
Oh, no.
They've developed traumatic mental conditions. One guy I read sold his house immediately because he was too afraid to fall asleep in it ever again. Even suicides are attributed to the trauma that this can cause. There are both men and women who are 100% sure they've been physically raped by whatever demonic force their cultural context made them believe attacked them.
Wow.
And like when Dan did a very fine job discussing the religiously confirming mental disorder temporal lobe epilepsy in episode 169, sleep paralysis is very commonly a terrorizing confirmation of religious belief.
Right.
Just
Of
like it
course
was
it
for
is.
my poor Aunt Ethel. In pre-scientific times, or for people who aren't interested in or even still reject science, I'm looking at you, pandemic-ravaged America, what other possible explanation could there be? But it's not jinns or the Newfoundland night hag or even Beelzebub. It's a little software glitch in our amazing but still evolving mess of a brain. So that's sleep paralysis, which is really a very spooky thing if you have it. But once you understand what it is, it still sucks. But it's not the devil.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you talk about the abduction narrative and all that sort of thing. It makes a lot of sense to me that you're waking up out of your deep sleep. Whatever dream you were having in that moment,
Exactly right.
gets tied directly into what's happening in your paralysis state, and suddenly you can have that could go in all kinds of crazy directions.
Yeah, you jump in your internal narrative from the dream state to consciousness like that.
Yeah.
Right, and so that doesn't mean that the dream state is necessarily over. You may not only is Pareidolia at work, and you're creating images in the darkness to try to figure out what to focus your fear on, right, and what to respond to.
Right.
You may still be in the narrative of whatever that dream was. So it's possible you were dreaming about aliens, and if you're scared of them, and then suddenly there they are in your room, and you can't move.
Yeah,
Well, and if you're in the middle of a scary dream about aliens, that fear thing that you were talking about is heightened.
Yeah.
So that's probably going to increase the chances that you're going to have the night terror there, or the paralysis, and then boom, it all feeds on itself.
Well, it stands to reason that there could be a another side to this coin. Because I've never had sleep paralysis, but I have on not many occasions in my life, but been running in my dream or slipped and fallen in my dream, and I've kicked my legs up. I knocked a shelf full of books onto myself one time. I've knocked shit off the nightstand, and this doesn't happen often, but where it's maybe my paralysis is lifted before I'm out of my dream state.
Yeah. Well, there's another phenomenon, and I can't remember what it's called, that specifically has to do with the sense of falling.
Right.
That wakes you up.
Right.
And they think that may come from when we lived in trees, when we slept in trees, to keep us from falling out of the tree unconscious, right? So I can't remember what that's called, but yeah, it's. I didn't realize that you were generally fully paralyzed during your dream.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting too, because we've talked about this many times. Is what would you do? A question posed by a religious person to an atheist: what would you do if you saw a vision of the Virgin Mary or of Jesus? And the first thing I would do is drive or hopefully get someone to drive me to a hospital.
Right.
Because, I think it's easy to assume, and oftentimes correct, that these things are issues with the brain chemistry.
Well, look, I'm try to be as rational a person as I can, and I was an atheist when this first thing happened to me 20 years ago. And I'm telling you, that thing was standing in my room as clearly as if you would be standing in my room.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? I saw it. I saw the thing standing there. And now I know that I was projecting it into the darkness, but it was terrifying. And if you look at someone like our Aunt Ethel, this became one of the defining things about her life. Right? She would always tell us these stories whenever we saw her. She believed the devil was as physically real as you or me, and was in her room frequently.
Just haunting the shit out of some old lady for no good reason.
In Saskatoon for no good reason. Leave the old ladies in Saskatoon alone, you son of a bitch.
Right?
So anyway, that's sleep paralysis.
Crazy.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, let's move on.
Dream on.